Hi, this is Jackie Portnoy, and this is Module 6 for child development. And I have asked my son, or kind of made him, participate in my assignment, and we're going to present the information as an interview.
So, Mom, tell me about peer relations and the importance of play.
So it should come as no surprise that peer relationships are essential to our overall happiness, and as well as our success in our professional and personal lives. What we may not realize is that the foundation for our peer relationships and for our ability to interact with our peers was made during the preschool years.
What ways do you think children learn about socialization?
Okay, I love books. I love books. One of my favorite books as a child was Curious George. If you don't know the book, Curious George was a little monkey who was adopted by the man with the big yellow hat, or the man with the yellow hat, and Curious George gets in all sorts of trouble. And in the end, no matter what Curious George did, the man with the big yellow hat was just concerned about George. And I love that. And I still love Curious George. One of the books that had the most profound impact on me growing up during my adolescence was a book by Judy Blume called Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Margaret in the story was a 12-year-old girl who was experiencing adolescence through the pages of the book. And I remember being able to associate with Margaret in almost everything that was happening to me at the time. Anybody who was an adolescent in the 70s knows this book. Several girls in my neighborhood weren't allowed to read the book. Their parents had refused to allow them to read the book. So of course we snuck it to them, and they read the book, and we were able to really associate with that character. I still love adolescent literature 40 years later. So I think that one of the ways that we can teach socialization is through good characters in literature.
What are some challenges in helping children with disabilities have good peer relationships?
So one of the components of this assignment was to examine children with disabilities. My youngest son has been diagnosed with as being on the autism spectrum. He's struggled with peer relationships since his preschool days. He was even a biter. He continued to have behavior issues through kindergarten and first grade into second grade. By third grade, one of the teachers suggested that we have him get seen by a behavioral psychologist, and we did. We were living in New Jersey at the time, and the psychologist couldn't come up with any diagnosis. She couldn't put him anywhere in a diagnostic category. Soon after we moved to Northern Virginia, and we had him reevaluated here, and he was placed on the autism spectrum. He tested on the spectrum. So one of the things that's important for students on the spectrum, at least, is helping them to manage their peer relationships or to establish peer relationships. He attends high school now, and he's been pupil placed in a school that has a center for children who are on the autism spectrum. And he hates it because he says it's not a real high school, but it is. And I think that he really is in the right place for him to learn and grow.
And I've been noticing you've been doing some research, and what did you find?
So in preparing for this assignment, I read an encouraging study done by UCLA. It was called the UCLA Peers Program, and it was presented in the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, and the study was done in 2012. The program addressed the issues of autism spectrum disorders in children who were being mainstreamed into high schools. Social deficits and poor peer interaction are cited as one of the main challenges for these students. Reading the article really resonated with me. One of the interesting observations of the study was that because of the way students interact with one another, or kids interact with one another now through social media and through texting, they're not learning the social cues, the body language of the person, so they can't pick up on those things. So somebody who typically would have a difficult time with that anyway is at an even further deficit because of the way children communicate. The UCLA Peers Program, they were able to understand, they used role play, help the students understand and react to real-time social situations and social interactions. The study also had a parent component, which I thought was really interesting, and the parents were tasked to look at the peer relationships that their children were engaged in and offered feedback.
So, what do you think is the most important aspect of peer relations?
So for my son, it was finding his people. And by people, I mean people who share his interests and share his same worldview, which is different from his peers. He tends to perseverate on main ideas. He monopolizes conversations. He has difficulty with eye contact. So this summer, he has been playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, which is a card game, at a local store. He goes there on Thursday nights, and he found his people. These are his people. He is really getting a lot out of this activity. He learns social cues. He's actually playing with peers in real time. And the young men that own the shop get their clientele. They really understand the people that come and play this game. And I've observed several times, and I'm really amazed at how they help these young kids or young adults, in many cases, manage peer relationships.
So, what about kids with physical disabilities? What challenges do they face?
So physical disabilities present an equal challenge to students of all ages. However, the stakes in middle school tend to change. Middle school is a terrible place for many adolescents. The key is to find your peers and to stay together. Students who have disabilities of any kind are often made fun of or ostracized. Finding that connection is harder for these students, and without intervention from the adults in the school, sometimes their experiences are not so great. Depending on the severity of the physical disability, some children can only participate with their peers in limited instances. For some children, I think mainstreaming them into the general school population can do more harm than good.
What impact does race, gender, and socioeconomic status have on peer development?
So when talking about children, we all have a unique point of view. I was raised here in Northern Virginia. I was a traveling nurse for about 5 years, and I've lived all over the country. Now my sons attend the public school where I was raised and where I attended, and I'm actually teaching at the high school that I attended many, many years ago. There are many challenges faced by public school systems from my perspective. The education provided by by public schools, I think, is admirable. I'm of course biased. I am a middle-class Caucasian. I do not face the many inequities that my non-white, non-middle-class peers faced growing up. No discussion of education or socialization would be comprehensive without considering the disparities across racial and socioeconomic lines. These variances have existed for as long as I can remember. And the question is, why haven't we been able to make that change?
So what can you, a teacher, do to, implement these changes that we need?
So as educators, we need to be aware that these biases still exist. The playing field is not level. It's difficult for many to understand a perspective that is not the same as theirs. Empathy is critical to being a successful teacher. Having an open dialogue on the way differences make us unique and contribute to a more compassionate society is also critical. We need to speak up when we witness prejudice of any kind. Teach children at an early age about feelings and helping them understand their actions and their reactions to their peers is really important as well. One of the lessons I teach my nursing students is about empathy. Many of them mistake sympathy for empathy. And I tell them the difference is sympathy is what you offer somebody who's suffered a loss. And empathy is the ability to understand how that person feels about the loss. And tolerance is another area that needs improvement in our society. Unfortunately, I think we're slipping backwards.
And what about gender bias? How do educators assure that this disparity does not affect their classrooms?
So gender is another area that's been widely researched. The prevailing belief still is that males perform better in math and sciences, and females perform better in the humanities. There's an abundance of research that bears that out. I happen to teach a subject with a very strong gender bias. Nursing is one of the worst careers when it comes to gender biases. Teaching is another one. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I do know that male nurses are an asset to our profession. One way to evaluate a society in general is the toy aisle at Target. I've never seen a male nurse Ken doll. I've also never seen a male teacher Ken doll. It's hard for me to understand how we're going to impact this generation when our toys are still rooted in the 1950s.
So, last question. What about poor students? What effect does being poor have on the ability to have positive peer relationships?
So we first have to realize that poor children exist. They don't look any different, oftentimes, than the rest of the children. I've heard people criticize a student who's on free lunch because they wear designer clothes and have a smartphone. Most people are just one paycheck away from poverty. As educators, we need to understand that we cannot take for granted that our students have a roof over their head or that they're getting nutritious food to eat. Children who are poor understand what they don't have. But what I find universally is they're grateful for the things that they do have. It goes back to that foundation that was laid back in preschool. Friendship should not come with a price tag, and helping children find the good in each other regardless of their parents' income is an important step.
That was very interesting, and good luck with your grade.
Thanks, honey.